Thank you so much. Okay, thanks everyone for joining this afternoon. I know there's still a few people coming in. Really pleased to see such a strong turnout. It's a really big day for me in particular. For those who haven't met me, my name's Alon. I'm a design team lead at Oliver, and I've been in the company for 8 years. We were less than 100 people when I started, and I've seen us grow from down here to up here. I'm British, proud northerner, long-suffering Sunderland fan. I like my tea strong and milky. I'm a chocoholic, but I've never eaten cake, never seen Star Wars. I'll just pause for a second while everyone gasps. I'm a classic extroverted introvert and appreciate my downtime. I've found the last couple of years have been really tough for my mental health. I've worried about my friends and my family, just like a lot of other people have. I find it really easy to give an introduction about myself when I'm doing it for the first time, but it might come as a surprise to you that I've always been a bit more hesitant to say this. I'm Jewish. I've not exactly been hiding it. Surprisingly, the fact that I've never eaten cake actually comes up quite a lot more. It's always just felt a bit easier to make an excuse not to go out on a Friday night or to eat food a little bit differently. Or when asked, are you doing something nice on your day off? And I know I've got some sort of Jewish festival the next day. I'll say, yeah, it's just family stuff, which wasn't entirely untrue. Most Jewish festivals are nearly all centered around family values, eating, but it wasn't the whole story either. It just felt a little bit easier. Then it dawned on me that I'm part of a company that encourages its teams to bring their whole selves to work. And I'm really grateful for that. And being Jewish is a huge part of my identity, just as others listening will identify in one way or another, ethically, sexually, religiously, culturally. I wouldn't want anyone in my team to feel like they couldn't bring their whole selves to work. So I've worked with a fantastic charity called March of the Living to organize a speaker today, and I'm bringing my whole self to work. My own family history is one of persecution for being Jewish, and it's a familiar story. My dad traced our heritage back 16 generations to Spain, where at the time, our family were ordered to either convert to Catholicism or leave the country. They chose to stay and convert, but like thousands of others, they kept their Judaism in secret, lighting their Sabbath candles in cupboards, unscrewing vases that turned into cups for blessing the wine. They went to great lengths to continue the customs that I practice and sometimes take for granted today. To cut a long story short, Jews faced discrimination for being different wherever they went, scapegoated for plagues, thought of as being inferior to the native white populations of Europe, and accused of conspiring to world domination. You don't have to go too far these days to see those kind of themes in anti-Semitism. Discrimination had become so deep-rooted in society that when the Nazi Party came to power, the right-wing fascist movement had its sights on eliminating us entirely. 6 million Jews were systematically murdered, along with millions of others considered undesirable to society. For many, the Holocaust will sound like an age ago, consigned to history and maybe not even that relevant to you in everyday life. But it's only been 77 years next week since the liberation of Auschwitz. Most of us listening will have been alive for 30, 40, 50 or more of those years. Our grandparents or parents may be in that age range. The Holocaust doesn't predate the world we live in. It happened, looked on by people who live in this world today. And the discrimination that was built into the fabric of society and led to the Holocaust still remains in many forms today. Active anti-racism, active anti-discrimination means taking personal responsibility to learn from the atrocities of the past and to actively play a part in changing society for a better future. I myself still have a lot to learn, and there's a lot more that I could do. So today we have the privilege of being able to hear a first-hand account from the Holocaust, to ask questions and to learn. Our guest not only shares her story of survival, but we'll also be speaking to her about her life as an immigrant, about sexism, society today, and about what role we can play. Please use the chat function in Zoom to send comments. Some of you are already doing that. We'll share these with our speaker afterwards, and please send questions to host and panelists throughout. We're going to pick those up for our Q&A at the end, and the first 20 questions will receive a signed copy of our guest book, Yellow Star, Red Star. We won't have time to do all the questions, but we'll see if we can get the answers to those afterwards. The only thing left for me to do is to hand over to our CEO for Global Markets, Sharon Whale, who is going to introduce our guest speaker for today.
Thank you, Alon. I'd like to apologise in advance for my dodgy Wi-Fi, and if it's not quite working, I apologise in advance. Thank you, Alon. What a personal and honest and brilliant introduction. The reason we're all here today is to meet, listen to, talk to and ask questions of the amazing Dr. Agnes Kaposi. Agnes Kaposi was born in Hungary in 1932, a year before Hitler came to power. She started school at the outbreak of World War II. Many of her friends and family were murdered in the Holocaust, together with 500,000 other Hungarian Jews. But a series of miracles and coincidences allowed her to survive. She worked as a child labourer in the agricultural and armament camps of Austria and was liberated by the rampaging Soviet army. She struggled through post-war hardship to re-enter Hungarian society, only to be caught up in a decade in the vice of Stalinism. And in 1956, the Hungarian Revolution offered her a chance to escape. She entered Britain as an engineering graduate. She started a family, she built a career as a researcher, as an educator, as an engineer, as a consultant. She was only the third woman to ever become the Fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering. Dr. Kaposi is now retired, but in her words, busier than ever. And actually, she told me when we met at the age of 89, this is just her current career. So something to aspire to. She spends her time writing, lecturing, speaking to people like us, partaking in debates, listening to good music and playing bridge. She has a wonderful family, including 5 grandchildren, to whom she's very attached and very involved, and many friends, young, old, near and far. So on that note, welcome, Agnes.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. If we could have the first slide, I want to quote at you something that I learned about your company. That go back to the one before, please. That you are committed to diversity, equality, and inclusion. That is what I was told when I read up about what you stand for. And something else. It says, and I'm quoting, our code of ethics prohibits the use of child labor and any form of forced, bonded, or compulsory labor. Well, all of these things are contrary to my own experience. Like Alon, I too am Jewish, but unlike he, I was brought up without any religion. In my family, instead, social justice and education were the things that guided us. Let's go to the next picture. Thank you very much. Instead of the diversity for which you stand, the country where I lived was for uniformity, and if you didn't belong to exactly that particular brand, then you were punished for it. Other religions, this is a quote, other religions included any Christian religion other than Catholicism. It was a Catholic country. So the Jews as well as the Christians who were not Catholics were discriminated against. Equality, the concept didn't exist. Instead, there was discrimination. And instead of inclusion, there was systematized exclusion. And that was the country into which I was born. The next slide, please. Discrimination, this sequence is not mine. I quote it, you will find it everywhere. Discrimination leads to hatred, to persecution, murder, and ultimately the Holocaust. In case you haven't got a definition, I have one, a definition for the Holocaust. Next slide, please. It says systematic state-sponsored persecution, destruction and mass slaughter of people because of their race, color, religion, sex, and so on. You can read it. All of these were practiced in the country where I was born and in the country to which it was committed and linked, which was at that time Germany. The losses of the Holocaust were, like I just said a minute ago, not excluded, not exclusively Jews. Losses included For example, being murdered, about 2 million people were murdered because they were Jehovah's Witnesses. Why they were picked upon, particularly, I really do not know. Political causes were a basis for exclusion and persecution. The Roma, about 250,000 people were murdered because of their race, because they were the Roma. Most astonishingly, there was euthanasia practiced on Germans themselves if they were born imperfect. German babies, and that is not very widely known, by their hundreds of thousands were murdered at birth because they were deemed not to be perfect, and they were for the perfect race. Well, this is the background. Go to the next slide. The Jewish losses were really quite astonishing. Polish and Soviet area losses, 4.6 million. Hungarian losses, 600,000. Romanian losses are 300,000. German and Austrian losses together, 200,000, and the rest of Europe, 300,000. Those seem to have been lost from this slide. Just leave this for the moment. I want to emphasize the enormous Hungarian loss. 600,000 people were lost from Hungary. Some, a small number, were Roma losses or others, like I mentioned before. The majority, almost all of them, were Jews. Now, this is so surprising. Now, the next slide, because, next slide, please, because the Hungary is so tiny. In the whole of Europe, something like half as many Jews were murdered as in Hungary itself. Only just in little Hungary, 10% of the entire loss of the Holocaust was the losses of Hungary. Half of the people murdered in Auschwitz were Hungarian Jews. This is not widely known. Hungary is a country which has a great history of struggling under tyrannical rules. The next slide sums it up pictorially. During Nazi times, Hungary is hanging at the bottom, establishing for itself a Nazi-style tyranny. When the war was over, the timeline is at the bottom, 1945 to 47, there was a small period of them trying to establish some kind of democratic rule. It didn't function. In came Stalinist style tyranny, which they attempted to break in 1956. There was a revolution. I will mention this later. It was unsuccessful. The Stalinist tyranny re-established itself, and until the collapse of the Soviet Union as a whole in 1989, it continued under Soviet-style tyranny. Since then, there is a tyrannical, odious tyrannical populist government, which among all the populist governments, it seems the worst. So this is, if you like, the political history of Hungary in the duration of my own lifetime. I was born in 1932, as has been mentioned. Let's have the next slide. That slide shows you that Hungary started on, and I don't expect you to read it, merely just to note it, that Hungary started on anti-Jewish laws way before anybody had even heard the name of Stalin. In 1920, there was a law which restricted Hungarian young people to be educated into the professions. Subsequently, you will see the list of dates, 38, 39, 41, 42, were the major acts against the Jews in Hungary. Altogether, there were 42 laws, of which these were only the major ones. Some of them were absurd. There was, for example, at one point, a law brought against doctors, Jewish doctors, being able to treat anybody but Jewish patients. Now, this is an extraordinary law of folly. Not only did it punish the Jewish doctors, it also punished the Hungarian people as a whole, because at that time, half of the doctors of the country were Jews. And if overnight you bring in a law and you prevent Jewish doctors from administering to any patient other than Jewish patients, that means the country is deprived of half its doctors by law. Well, that was the country. The next slide, please. We now flicked through my life quite quickly, and I want to draw your attention to the rectangles in the corners in the whole sequence of pictures from now on, which emphasize the difference between my experience and what your company stands for. Remember, you want diversity, inclusion, and so on. Well, what happened was that in 1933, January, Hitler came to power. 3 months previously, I was born. And in the same year, in fact, on the 1st of October, 1932, the first radical right-wing prime minister came to power in Hungary, and my father was excluded from his job on that occasion, not because he was a Jew, but for political reasons, because he was a socialist and he was therefore unreliable. That's when the poverty of my childhood started. My father remained unemployed throughout my childhood. Go to the next slide. The continuation was my earliest memories as a preschool child were this kind of racist propaganda. This is against the Jews, kill the Jew as the monster. There were many similar posters. I could have included one where the Jew is shown to be dripping with money, grabbing the financial power of the whole world. I couldn't understand it, and my father had great difficulties to explain to me, who are these Jews who everybody is to hate? I asked, and he said, we are those Jews. So I said to my father, but you haven't got a big nose like that, and we are not rich like those Jews are depicted to be. No, we are in fact quite poor. So why do we get hate? Why do people hate the Jews? And my father, whom I thought used to know everything, that was the question to which he didn't have an answer. He couldn't explain to me why we were being hated and described why people were incited to kill us. The next slide, please. These were members of my family. These were my uncles, and there's a list down there. They had chosen their profession wrongly because they were lawyers, doctors, civil engineer among them, a banker, an artist, a musician, all of them precluded from working in their professions by the act which is quoted there. Not all Jews were so excluded, but a small percentage could only function in society. And because my uncles were young, and they were new graduates in 1938 when this law came to power, they couldn't establish themselves in their profession. They graduated and they immediately joined the ranks of the unemployed. For me, this was a good fortune because I didn't have any playmates. A Jewish child couldn't be played with, it was not allowed. Instead, I had all these playmates who made my childhood rich and wonderful. They took me into their heart. I was the only child in the extended family. So I learned about their professions, and I had a happy enough childhood until something else happened. The next slide, please. On the 1st of September 1939, the war broke out, and on the 11th of September the same year, I went to school. I did well at school. I loved school. I loved learning. I still do. The building on the right-hand corner of this is the school building. The far door, there were two doors. The far door was the junior school entry. And I entered that school on the 1st of September, 1939. But by the time I graduated to join the senior school on the 1st of September, 1943, a law prevented me from joining the school because I was a Jew. The next slide, please. The war progressed, and the map on the left just reminds you that by 1942, almost all, the whole of Europe was under German rule. And my uncles, the ones that I mentioned to you before, the ones who made my childhood rich and happy, were drafted into the Hungarian army. The Hungarian army itself murdered these people. They were killed by the fellow members of the same army because they were taken to the front without arms, without uniforms, and with the instructions to their commanding officers that these Jews are not to return. Well, they did not. They were all murdered. The next slide, please. Worse was to come when the German army occupied its ally, Hungary. Hungary was under German influence, but not under German rule until 1944 March, because Hungary had gone into the war on Germany's own side. But it seemed that they were not a reliable ally. They were also not quick enough in persecuting the Jews. So something had to be done about it. The German army occupied Hungary in March 1944, and laws came one after the other. There was a law bringing in the wearing of the yellow star in April 1944. By the end of April, ghettos were to be built. They were tighter than prisons. Nobody in, no goods in, nobody out, no goods out, no, I mean, it was a tight and cruel prison. This was discrimination and exclusion of Jewish citizens of the country. Now, the next slide shows you how matters accelerated quickly. By 14th of May 1944, deportations started. Bear in mind, deportation by now is of the old and the women and the children, because the young Jewish men had already been killed in the army, as I had shown you before. 470,000 Jews were taken to Auschwitz. In this period of 56 days, this is hailed as one of the greatest achievements of the Nazi regime, that they managed to murder 470,000 Jews in 56 days. They had to build a special ramp in Auschwitz to accommodate this enormous influx of Hungarian Jews. There were 15,000 Jews, bizarrely, interestingly, and I could tell you why if you are interested, taken to Austria instead of Auschwitz, and I am one of them. Our own train, the wagon looked just like the one on the left. The procedure was just like this artist's impression that you see in the picture on the right. The train, our train, was also headed for Auschwitz. It started from the city of Debrecen, my native city, on the 27th of June. And on the 25th and 29th of June, there were trains to Auschwitz from Debrecen, and those people who were taken to Auschwitz were among the 470,000 murdered. Why our train on the 27th of June was diverted instead to Austria is a matter of debate among historians. There are various theories, and if you are interested, ask me and I shall tell you what I believe currently to be the explanation. Whatever it was, we were in fact taken, our train was diverted halfway to Auschwitz, then diverted, and we were taken to Austria instead. Now, what happened next is shown on the next slide, please. I was 11-year-old. Do you remember about your company's code? No child labor, no forced labor. Well, I was 11 years old, and I worked as a farm laborer together with all the adults from before sunup to past sundown under conditions. Again, I would tell you more detail if you wish, inhuman conditions. Farm labor was the worst. When farm work stopped because the snow came and the farm could not function anymore, then we were diverted to an armament factory. It was called the Arsenal, and it was, as far as I can ascertain, the last armament factory of the German Reich, because by then the Eastern Front progressed to the borders of Hungary and Austria. The Western Front was also progressing across Germany, and in the middle of the sandwich there was a slice still left in Austria where such a factory could function. This is the actual photograph of the anti-aircraft gun on which I worked, among others. The factory, as you could imagine, was the main target of air raids. Air raids were daily, and gradually the factory ceased to function. It couldn't work anymore. And then we were diverted to our third occupation, to work as laborers trying to clear bomb damage in the city of Vienna. Anybody visited the beautiful city of Vienna? You have been to the Opera House or to the Belvedere Palace, or what? I had been there too. It looked like you see on the picture. I was there with a wheelbarrow and a shovel trying to clear the bomb damage. This period didn't last very long, because by now the war was nearing its end. The next slide, please. The Soviet army came and liberated us. There are two dates shown on your picture. The 27th of January was the date when Auschwitz was liberated, and that is designated Holocaust Memorial Day. Next week there will be lots of commemorations, and I'm involved in several of them. Every day of next week, giving talks, listening to talks, participating in remembering that on the 27th of January 1944, Auschwitz was liberated. Our own liberation near Vienna came on the 30th of March. We were liberated by the Soviet army. Some people would have heard, for example, the liberation of Bergen-Belsen by the British army. and how the British Army looked after the skeletal the survivors, how they took them to hospitals, how they put them into clothing and under medical care. Nothing like this happened to us. The way the Soviet Army treated us is either with indifference or much worse, especially night times were very dangerous for women in the camps that the Soviet Army liberated. Nevertheless, they were not systematically there to murder us anymore, so we survived, it seemed. The next slide shows you what happened to us next. On the top left hand is Strasshof an der Nordbahn. This is the address of our last camp of all. On the bottom right hand corner is Budapest, which was the capital of Hungary, our target. We tried to get from near Vienna to Budapest. Why? The reason was twofold. We thought we might regain our home, and most importantly, we thought we might meet with our men. We didn't know that they were dead. Well, it took us a month. There was no public transport. We were skeletons. There was no food. There was no transportation. How that journey was is among the tales described in my book, Yellow Star, Red Star. In due course, after a month of mostly walking along on foot in across the war-beaten countryside of Austria and Hungary, we finally fetched up in Budapest. The next slide shows you. This is what Budapest looked like. Budapest is a beautiful city. Tourist advertising would show you photographs of the Royal Castle on one side and the famous chain bridge across the river, the Blue Danube, and what. Well, this is what the city looked like. Homecoming is in quotes there because discrimination, exclusion, and even pogroms, murder of the returning Jews continued. We were not aware of the pogroms at the time. They were mostly in the villages, but also in Hungary itself. We were aware of indifference and of discrimination and exclusion. We never regained our home. It had been taken away when we left it. It was given to somebody else, and we never got it back. We never got back any of our possessions. Nevertheless, we tried to establish some kind of new life for ourselves. Broken families. My father was a skeleton. My mother was injured. Her spine was injured during our time in the camps. I was by then 12 years old, and my responsibilities were heavy. Anyhow, let's have the next slide. Then came the Stalinist dictatorship. You will have heard about it. There is uniformity. If you did not conform, if it was known that you had ideas of your own, then the best was that you were punished, worse that you were taken to Siberia. Some people disappeared altogether. There was oppression and persecution because diversity was not tolerated. Diversity of any kind, even cultural diversity, even the music you could listen to was regulated. I became an engineer, and I'm quite pleased that I did, but I didn't want to be. I was told that I was to go to university and study engineering. I wanted to be a physicist, but whoever wanted whoever had any idea, those ideas were squashed. There was total oppression. The next slide, please. This is an example of socialist realist art. These kinds of pictures, these sorts of sculptures were permitted, but only these. Merely just a symbol to give you an impression what life was like. The next slide, please.
Agnes, I'm conscious of time. You asked us to give you a 5-minute warning, so we are
Right. Thank you very much. I am at the end. I really am at the end of what I wanted to tell you. Here comes the day. The day of the 20, thank you very much, of the 22nd of October 1956 was the day of the Hungarian Revolution. The revolution was put down soon by Soviet tanks rolling across the capital city, as you can see on the left. The two pictures on the right, I think, should be interesting to look at. That was a statue of Stalin standing in a prominent position. And there are some human figures there, just to give you an impression of the size of it. And during the revolution, they dragged it down, and there's the head in the picture below. That revolution didn't last very long. Very soon, it was a beautiful idea. I mean, it had liberal democratic intentions, but very soon after, about a few days after, the revolution was switched over to blaming the Jews. Everything that had been going wrong was always the fault of the Jews. And then came the Soviet backlash. So the revolution was over, and it gave an opportunity on the next slide for my young husband and me to leave the country and find another life, try to find another life elsewhere. It took 6 weeks. Why did it take us 6 weeks to come to Britain, which was our target? You could ask me questions and you could read about it in my book. Nevertheless, it was 6 hungry, tiring, cold weeks. It was practically the month of December, end of December, month of January. We arrived in Cambridge, in the next slide, on the 27th of January, 1957. The 27th of January has several significances. You might remember it is the liberation of Auschwitz, and it is also the date of entry of my husband and me to Britain. We came to Cambridge, which is just about the most peaceful and most beautiful place that you could ever hope to be. That it was a contrast from war-torn, revolution-torn Hungary. On the left is the labor permit, which we were seeking. It was that labor permit that took us 6 weeks to obtain. We arrived in this country as both of us, and this is mine, my husband had one of his own, as graduate engineers. And so from the moment I set foot in this country, I have been a taxpayer, I still am, and a worker. And this is the end of my story. And so here I am now in Britain. And from now on, the rest of the slides are not for show. Now, this is an interesting slide. Go back to that for a moment. The one just before, this one. Oops, hold on. The next. No, that one. This one. I want to draw your attention to it. This is a symbol of the present populist government's policy. They deny any responsibility, any Hungarian responsibility for any wrongdoing during the war. They try to picture the country as a victim of Nazism, as opposed to a perpetrator of Nazism. In front of it is a collection of objects that the population of Hungary, mostly the Jews and Gypsies, whose families had been murdered. They compiled here evidence of what the Hungarians had actually done, instead of what they lie to have done. The red poster over there translates into history falsification, intellectual, cultural massacre. Well, this is what happened in Hungary and what is going on now. Thank you very much.
Dr. Agnes, that was incredible. There have been so many messages of, to thank you for your honesty, the fact that you, I know you've told this story many times, but the fact that you can share it so factually. I think everybody's slightly dazed and shocked by what the human race is capable of. We have many questions. I think we'll go to a few of those now. If I kick us off with the first one, I think Claire asked, do you think, what is anti-Semitism like in Hungary today? What is the current situation?
Well, I don't live there, and therefore I haven't the authority to tell you about this that I have over the parts that I did describe. The authority, I'm not a historian, but I am a researcher, and I try to be factual, and I try to have support for what I am saying, and therefore I cannot, with the same authority, tell you what goes on now. But what I am hearing is, first of all, that anti-Semitism is always there. It is latent. During the Nazi times, the tyranny was held in place by the will of the people, whereas during communist times, the tyranny was held into place by fear, by oppression by the country. This time, anti-Semitism is there. It has always been there. It is not blatant because the present government has, the present leader has this ability of turning a different face to different audiences. So he can make friends with the Israeli government. He can gather to his bosom the chief rabbi at the same time as supporting the anti-Semitic, popular anti-Semitic feeling in the country, and doing the oppressive acts because of which the Jews suffer. But not only the Jews. The present government is oppressive of anyone who is contrary to their particular political leaning. Anti-Semitism is bad. The government supports it, but it is also part of the present regime of tyranny against all those that are against the present government.
Shocking.
Yeah.
Alon,
it's a dreadful country. Go on.
Alon, you must have lots of questions that you want.
So many questions I can't keep up. Everyone's really interested. I've got one here from Lisa Hall. Do you think your fellow Hungarians who didn't speak out or oppose what was happening should be held accountable as those who initiated and enforced it? There are clear parallels here with events of our generation.
Well, I think that the question relates to those who didn't speak out in Nazi times. I suppose this is what the question relates to. Bear in mind, in those times, I was up to 11 years old. The adults didn't speak out. My family did not have any supporters. But I did not have. As a child, I had no sense of being sympathized with, empathized with even. But I don't know how adults felt at that time. I was not an adult at that time. I was a child. I was thrust out of society, that I knew. I was, for example, I can tell you, there was nobody speaking up for me when I was top of my class, excellent student in the junior school, and not allowed to proceed to the grammar school because I was a Jew. I can tell you what it felt like. I can tell you that there was no teacher who would have said, but please take this girl of ours. But what could they have done? There was a law against it. I haven't got a good answer.
There's a question here from Anad. He says, thank you for sharing your story. I can't even imagine to think how it must have felt being taken on the trains to the camps. My question is, were there times when you felt there was no light at the end of the tunnel and no way out? Or did you have to find ways to keep your hopes and spirits up? And if so, how did you stay positive during those times?
Well, this is a complicated and wonderful question, and I do have answers to this one. First of all, that we were under such extreme conditions, especially when we were in the agriculture camp, when we, like I said, we were starved and we were working from darkness at dawn till darkness in the evening, working. We were living from one moment to the next. There was no such thing as hoping for a future. There was no such thing as the next instant. You had to survive the present and now. I was asked this, what kept your hopes up? We didn't, hope is a long distance thing. We were living from moment to moment. Anybody who says otherwise were either under better conditions than we, or they had, I don't know, where their strength came from. What drove me was loyalty to my family. My camp family included 3 old ladies, 2 toddlers, and the rest were adults. All of the adults, in one way or another, were incapacitated. For example, 2 of my aunts had a heart condition. And when we were working in the hot summer on the fields, they kept on fainting. And we had an SS guard. And somehow you had to shield them or divert the attention of the SS guard because it was fearful that they might be shot. And I felt the responsibility that these 2 aunts of mine who are likely to faint should not be exposed. The 2 toddlers, they were very, very dear to me. I was an only child. And I was a lonely child as well, like I said before. And these 2 tiny children, one was age 2 and the other 3 years old. And they were so precious to me. And the possibility of finding a berry, something edible, and taking it home to them and giving them something to eat or something to sustain them. That was the inspiration. It wasn't the hope for the future. It was the responsibility for those I loved, and in particular for those two tiny children who were with us. We saved them both. They were very badly damaged, both of them, but we saved them. And I can say with a great pride that I contributed. I was 11, I turned 12 while we were there. And I knew that responsibility. I felt the responsibility. And I feel the pride today that they survived. That is what kept me going, is the love and loyalty of those people around me.
Incredible. You talk a lot about loyalty and values and being true to your values.
Sure.
Is that something that still, guides you to this day?
Absolutely, yes. When my husband fell mortally ill, I had to give up working. If it hadn't been for that, I would still be working as an engineer. But I had to give up working, and I was his full-time carer. And then he died. That was 10 years ago. And then I quite consciously thought, well, I would be more used to society dead than alive, because I am no longer working. And I have got, for example, a home, and it could be given to somebody else who is useful to society if I am not here anymore. And then I had to figure out a way of how to make myself of use to society. And that is when I started on a career of not telling my story only, but to telling my story in the context of what is happening since. And I am involved with a great variety of different people. For example, I work with a Muslim school. I work with communities, not particularly Jewish communities, or not even with Jewish communities, but communities that need support. And I think I might be able to do that. And that is what keeps me going. Yes.
Incredible. Incredible. And what is your, there's a question from Rachel Levine, says, thank you so much for sharing your story. What is your relationship with Judaism or Judaism right now?
We were never, no, it's not just me. Hungarian Jews were very different from Jews, for example, of Poland or Russia. Hungarian Jews lost their Yiddish language. They spoke instead Hungarian. They became secularized. They were, to some extent, loyal Jews. They knew that they were Jews. They knew that they were Jews. They didn't abandon their faith and take up another faith. In fact, we despised those people who thought that they can find safety if, having not been religious Jews, suddenly they became religious Catholics. Well, then they were thrown out of the Catholic Church anyway, sooner or later, because the race laws went on the basis of blood, not on basis of you deciding to belong. So it didn't give them salvation. But we did despise them. We thought that they were disloyal. We knew that we were Jews, but religious we were not. And religious I am still not. But I am committed to working with Jewish communities to try to strengthen them in telling their story, because there is a story to be told.
Agnes, I've got a question from Sadie Brown. Why did you choose the UK as your home, and how do you feel about the UK today as a country?
Well, yeah, I thought it should come. My father was, as my parents both, they were socialists. And it was the liberal democracy, the parliamentary system, the independence of the British judiciary and the British civil service, from the state. The trade union movement, all of this is what was the basis of the morality of my family. And this is what drove me to come to this country. I found almost everything as I hoped for, except for the trade union movement. I must say the trade union movement disappointed me. I could give a whole complete talk about why. The idea that I was brought up with was that the trade union movement is about progress and about education, about equality, and so on. And the trade union movement did not meet all of those expectations. But yeah, this is what drove us here. Oh, well, all right, I might as well tell you what happened was that we arrived, it's of the same mindset. We arrived in Vienna, and there were 150,000 people, refugees, sweeping through Austria at that time. And there were loudhailers in the streets. Those able-bodied should go to the first railway station and quit the city, because the city is buckling under. There is going to be famine and disease. We cannot cope with such an influx of refugees. And I was 24 years old, and my husband was 28 years old, and we were fit and well. And we did what we were asked to do. We went to the first railway station. We climbed on the first train just to empty Vienna, because it was under social pressure. We didn't even know where we were going to fetch up. And we did fetch up in Paris, whereupon we went to the British embassy, and they said, we are clearing Vienna of its refugees. You have lost your refugee status when you left Austria. That's why it took us 6 weeks to come to Britain. Then we started applying for jobs in Britain. And how that's another part of the story, applying for jobs when you haven't got enough money for a piece of bread, and you then are spending money on postage stamps. Anyway, we applied for loads of jobs, and everybody said yes. Qualified electronic engineer graduates are exactly the people we want to employ. Come for interview. Catch-22, we couldn't come to the country because we didn't have a labor permit, and we couldn't get an interview because we weren't in the country for interview. So that's why it took us 6 weeks.
Amazing. So there's a question in here saying, what advice can you give us on resilience and hope? What can we share with our children so that we can stay awake to this never happening again? That's from Teresa.
Well, in general, the advice I would give, may it never happen again, but that is more a hope than an expectation. We have to work towards it not happening again. But the advice I would give is learn, don't stop learning, and make sure that every day you do something that helps others, even if it just helps one other person. At the end, I was asked this question from young people, and I said to them what I asked them what I asked from myself. At the end of the day, I look at the mirror, having brushed my teeth, and I say, am I content about the day that is just past me? What have I done today that makes it worthwhile for me to have lived? If I had learned nothing new, and if I had done nothing useful for others, then that would be a day lost. And I try not to allow a day to be lost from my life. That's very easy. Make sure that every day you learn something and you help somebody.
Incredible. That's advice for every single person on this call. And
so easy. It is so easy. It can be a big thing. Today, I can say I have spoken to 368 wonderful people the world over. Fantastic. And tomorrow, I am locked in my room over there with my back hurting and all of that. So I am not in contact with anyone, but I can still do something that helps somebody. And otherwise, the day is lost.
The day is lost. I know that, and Alon raised this when we met you before, and you've touched on it in your last answer, that you hope that we never have another Holocaust, but of course we do have other Holocaust type situations and genocides. What is your view on how we can work towards that not happening again? How optimistic do you feel or not?
Well, I don't know about optimistic. I think, go back to the, how to answer that? What we can do is to try to open minds. Let me give you the example of what I did for a Muslim school, because this is just an example. Here are these boys and girls in a secondary school. The school finishes at the age of 16 at GC. They don't do A-levels. They don't do the last 2 years of the secondary schooling. And the whole of the school is Muslim. There isn't, because that is the area. It's not a selective school, but this is the area. And the teachers, with I think 2 exceptions, are all Muslims. And the headmistress, who is a Muslim, says, I'm bringing up these children in a ghetto. This is a ghetto which is not imposed on them, not like the ghetto in which you were, but it's a ghetto nonetheless. They would need to leave this area and be fitted into society somehow. What can they do? How can you, Agnes, help them that they should fit into society better? So I go and talk to them about engineering. You know, it is a simple step. Engineering is a constructive profession. It's a problem-solving profession. It's a profession for which you can be dexterous, and then you can be a craftsman. You can be cerebral, and then you can be a theoretician with a PhD. It's a huge range. Anybody could be an engineer and be a constructive member of society. So I say to them, try to find whether you have got any of the skills which would then allow you to be a useful member of society. You don't even need to have a very different cultural background from your own. It doesn't matter that your cultural background is in your religion. You can find your way into society. Do you see? It's a different way of going about it from what it would be when I am asked to talk. Another example, to a girls' school in a very expensive area of London. This is a fee-paying Catholic girls' school. Then I have to try to work out in what way I could make them see how society is different from what they see. They see a very narrow range of society. How to open the mind, how to make them feel part of something bigger, even responsible for something bigger. than their own environment. I don't know if I am explaining it well, but
No, you are just the opening people's minds and continuing to open people's minds, to stop those narrow fields of thought and living in your own sort of everyday world, I think is fantastic advice. Fantastic. Alon, have you got one last question?
Yes, I will find one last question. Okay. In these COVID times and the split between vaccinated and non-vaccinated, do you worry that we are slowly seeing and getting used to the world where some kind of accepted discrimination and exclusion is being more and more accepted depending on your vaccination status?
well, that is a very, very difficult one. The vaccination status from my angle is one of social responsibility. It seems that, and you might disagree with this, and lots of people might, and I don't mind if they do. Here is what I think, that you can decide from your own selfish reasons, whatever, to be vaccinated or not. But every bit of evidence points that you are likely to put others at risk if you are not vaccinated, or you are likely to demand a great deal of the resources of society if you are not vaccinated. For instance, they are telling you how very many of the people in hospitals who are requiring extraordinary support, expensive support, breathing machinery and so on, they are the unvaccinated. So it seems that if you are not vaccinated, then you are putting others at risk.
Mm.
And so from that viewpoint, I would say, please consider your social responsibility and make your decision whether to be vaccinated or not on the basis of your social responsibility. I hope that more and more people will decide that there is enough evidence to prove that being vaccinated is an unselfish act. Not being vaccinated is a selfish act. That's how I see it. I might be wrong.
I think that's an excellent place in which to draw this to a conclusion. We are heading towards the end of our time together. I wanted to firstly, only thank you for spending so much time with us today. It's been fascinating, horrifying, educational, humbling, uplifting. I'm totally in awe of you. I was the first time I met you, of everything that you have achieved, of the way that you think, of your social consciousness, the way that you have paved the way for others to achieve, and that you are still helping open the hearts and minds of everyone that you meet. We owe you so much. We will keep doing our best to keep history in our collective consciousness and to keep learning and growing and doing good every day. I can't thank you enough because I know that you've been ill. I can't thank you enough for still spending time with us today. Absolute pleasure. Do you have any closing comments you would like to make?
Well, if there is any urgent question that you think that you would like to pass to me, please do. And I want also to congratulate you because the moral compass of your company is extraordinary. That you are a commercial organization, and you manage to find a way of reconciling that with high principles. This is extraordinary, and I wish you very well. I wish I would be young enough to come to work for you.
You are.
Thank you very, very much. It has been a pleasure, and don't hesitate to contact me if there is any question or if there is anything you think I could do to further your cause.
Thank you.
It's a great company, yours.
Thanks, Agnes.
Thank you, Agnes.
There's just obviously I want to say thank you as well. It's really a great pleasure to have you, and it makes me very proud to be bringing two of my worlds together. But I think Mel's also, I don't know if Mel's going to jump on. She's got some closing notes as well. We just want to give a couple of thank yous as well for how this happened.
Hi everyone. On behalf of the whole DE&I team and all of the change makers, I just want to say a couple of thank yous too. Firstly, to every attendee who has taken the time to show up today and learn. I think there's been almost 400 people on the call, which is a record, if I'm right, in our panel discussions. So your presence today has contributed towards a donation to March of the Living. So thank you for showing up today and learning. Thank you to March of the Living for making this possible and for their incredible work. I'd also really like to thank Alan he's produced this whole event. As a company, it's really important to us that we hold space for all of our underrepresented communities and that all of our employees, not just change makers, feel empowered to highlight the issues important to them. So thank you, Alan. Thank you to Sharon for taking the time to get to know Agnes and for being a really, really wonderful host today and helping us with the technical issues at the start. And last but not least, again, thank you to Agnes. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone in this call when I say that you are incredible. Someone in the chat said that your selflessness, not just in the face of pure survival and terror, but also in later life is awe-inspiring. And I think that really sums it up. We are very, very lucky to have had the opportunity to listen to you today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that leaves us there. In the words of Agnes, make sure that you learn something today, which you're here, so you have, and you help someone to really make every day count. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Agnes.
Everyone.
Thank you.